As we get to the end of the day today, our last three presentations all involve students. SABR has been fortunate to be able to support student-led research through this conference. And our next presenter is one such example. Julia Wapner is here to present research that she and her team have done on player matchup evaluations. Julia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Wapner. I am currently a senior at the University of Illinois, where I am majoring in statistics and Spanish with a minor in informatics. I was first introduced to and started working with sports analytics my freshman year when I joined the team, the group that does analytics for our University of Illinois baseball team. And last year, I started working on this project with two statistics professors, which I will be presenting right now. I am really excited to keep working on analytics in sports after graduation, where I'm going to be joining the Baltimore Orioles as an analytics fellow. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So the project that I'm presenting today is the SEAM methodology for estimating context-rich batted ball locations. And I'm working on this with Professors Daniel Eck and David Dalpiaz from the University of Illinois. So in baseball, spray charts are an extremely useful visualization because they help evaluate batted ball outcomes and player tendencies, such as the area of the field where the batter is most likely to hit the ball. So here we can see Joey Votto's 2021 hit spray chart. So we see the points on the field where the ball landed, and then this specific spray chart is color-coded by the batted ball outcome. But in baseball, context is very important, as each time a batter goes up to the plate, there's usually a different combination of the batter and the pitcher. So when we bring in the context, spray charts can become less useful because as we see here, for example, with Justin Verlander and Joey Votto, even though they both had long Major League Baseball careers, when they've met, it's only resulted in 2 balls in play. So as we look to try to predict what could happen after their next matchup, a spray chart won't be as helpful. So the goal of SEAM is to provide a view of where the ball is most likely to be hit using a combination of the pitcher and batter's overall tendencies and their historical matchup data. So I'll explain a little bit more about how we calculate all of this soon, but the basis of this methodology is that we use player similarity to bring in extra data points, and that brings in more context to, or more data that we'll be able to create this distribution off of. So density estimation. There are many non-parametric density estimators, and for this project, we chose to estimate the density using a bivariate non-parametric Gaussian kernel density estimator. So we use an implementation in R, which is similar to the KDE 2D from the mass package, for its quick computation and ease of use. And so then we will have a spray chart distribution for a batter, which is distribution F over the set of plausible locations of the batted balls from home plate, which is Y. So we're going to let F be the spray chart density function corresponding to the spray chart distribution F for the matchup between a particular pitcher and a particular batter. So the Y's are the observed batted ball locations for this matchup, and F is going to then be estimated with a multivariate kernel density estimator, as we see here. And then since the batted ball locations are only in 2 dimensions, the estimator can be reduced to this. However, this will not estimate well because of the limited data available for specific matchups that I mentioned previously. So we also know that spray chart distributions are conditional on several characteristics for the pitchers and the batters. So we will actually denote the spray chart distribution as f of y on x. So as we saw previously, similar to the previous slide, but we're recognizing it now that should be represented conditional on x, f of y on x is also a non-parametric regression model that will be estimated with the kernel density estimator, but where the sample of batted ball locations are not conditional on x. So to bring in those extra data points that we need for this to work, we're going to use player similarity. And the way that we define player similarity is uses a method that is widely used in baseball statistic calculations like PECOTA, which is used to forecast the ability of players using aggregate estimates obtained from other similar players. So these characteristics are considered on a per pitch type and per year basis. So the characteristics that we're looking at for batter similarity are mean exit velocity, mean launch angle, and proportion of hits to left, center, and right field. And then for pitchers, the similarity will be calculated using their mean release speed, mean release spin, the mean horizontal and vertical movement of their pitches, and the mean release position coordinates. So then, similarity between two pitchers was defined using the following method on the per pitch type and per year basis. So for a pitch type T, the similarity score of a pitcher J1 and J2 is defined as follows. And the V that we see here is a distance metric used to weight the different pitch characteristics and give preference to those that are defined to have higher influence. So in our Shiny app that we'll see later, where you can actually create these visualizations, users can define some of the weights with the sliders. And we chose a default of 0.85 ratio of stuff to release because we assume that the way the ball moves, which we say is stuff, is more relevant to similarity than release, but we allow for that to be changed. So then using those similarities, we calculate weights for all pitches in the pool to create a synthetic pitcher. So a spray chart density for a batter facing the synthetic pitcher, where J is the number of pitchers in the pool, is defined as follows. And this is a weighted average of the spray chart densities for the batter under study and all of the pitchers in the pool. The weights are chosen to reflect the similarity of the pitcher under study to all the others. So in other words, to create a synthetic pitcher against a chosen batter, all the pitches that a batter has faced against a specific pitch type are re-weighted based on how similar that pitcher that originally threw it is to the pitcher that we are studying. So the full seam calculation is as follows. We have it's a weighted combination of estimates of the empirical matchup, the synthetic pitcher, and the synthetic batter. And then these three lambda values balance how much information is obtained from each of the separate spray chart density estimators. And these lambda values are decided by the number of values in the empirical matchup and the similarities in the pitcher and batter pools. So preference is given to the empirical matchup as more data becomes available. And so if a specific matchup has happened a lot and it's resulted into a lot of balls in play, the empirical matchup will be weighted greater. So this is that equation, but now we can see how it directly corresponds to some of the visualizations that we have. So the F hats match up to the empirical matchup, synthetic pitcher and synthetic batter. And then as they're multiplied by those lambda values and added together, we get the full seam. So this is that example that I started out with Justin Verlander and Joey Votto. And so you can see how their empirical matchup only had those 2 points, but then when we create that synthetic pitcher and batter, it combines to create full seam. So in our application, which I'll do a little demonstration on later, this is all the plots that are available. So you can see the breakdown and also compare it to just the empirical pitcher and batter spray charts. So one of the important things for this is thinking about how it could potentially be useful. So one of the main things that we think it would be really useful for is defensive positioning. So teams now know to shift based on the batter's habits or what the pitcher tends to induce, but SEAM provides an even more specific way to view the potential batted ball locations with context. So here's just one example. So on the right, we see a really non-traditional defensive positioning that the Rays played against Joey Gallo. So we can see 4 outfielders and then heavy loaded on the right. And this is reflected in SEAM with Joey Gallo's hitting tendencies. But we can also see that SEAM might suggest bringing the left fielder in a little bit more. So this is just one possibility for the many ways that SEAM could be useful, but we really think that having more context to be able to help with the defensive positioning is one of the main ways. So now that I've kind of explained everything, I'm going to discuss a little bit about how we know if it actually works. So to validate this, we performed a leave a season out type validation. So we set aside all of the 2021 data to use as a test set, and then we used the 2017 through 2020 data as a train set. So we wanted to answer the question, do the 2021 balls in play fall in the high density regions calculated by SEAM? So across all the 2021 balls in play, the marginal coverage for the methods gives these proportions of the correctly covered balls in play. So we can see that SEAM covered more of the balls in play than simply just using the empirical pitcher or the empirical batter spray charts when looking at the matchups. And then we also did a conditional validation on specific matchups. And so we wanted to see when there's a little bit more data, does this actually work? So we found 195 matchups that existed that had 10 or more balls in play. So then we looked at how many of the matchups have coverage at or higher than the desired amount. So with a 50%, 75%, and 90% high density region, we saw that SEAM still had a higher proportion of coverage that were either at the target or higher than it than just simply using empirical batter or empirical pitcher spray charts. So from all these results, we see that we have a valid marginal coverage and better conditional coverage than empirical batter and pitcher spray charts. In addition, the mathematical reasoning suggests that the combination of these three spray distributions that form SEAM minimizes expected mean squared error. So some takeaways from all of this is that, so if there were infinite balls in play for a matchup available, the head-to-head spray chart would be used over the empirical batter or pitcher spray chart. So it's impossible to get that infinite amount, but the goal of SEAM is to perform a context-rich estimate of this head-to-head matchup despite the lack of existing head-to-head data. So we see that SEAM performs better than just using empirical batter or pitcher spray charts for estimating the balls in play location for a specific matchup. And so all this work that we've done so far has created SEAM that allows for a general framework that can be added to or for increased accuracy, usability, and realism. So some things that we think could potentially be interesting is that, going back to that slide where I had the list of the characteristics that go into making player similarity, you could use a ton of different data there, data that's available for StatCast, or now we've seen a lot of teams starting to use biomechanical data. So it would be interesting to see if we could find pitchers that really have a very similar release using the biomechanical data. And we could also think about using other measures than just the mean of all those characteristics, like quantiles. And we also could look into changing how the underlying spray charts are combined. And there's many other ways that could go into kind of adjusting the different ways that SEAM is calculated. But right now, this general framework exists and is producing pretty good results. In addition to kind of modifying how SEAM calculates, there's a lot of other potential areas where we think SEAM could be extended. So we could display the pitch charts on a per pitch type basis. So right now, the spray charts that are visualized are a proportional average over the different pitch types that a pitcher throws. But if there was a scenario where we could know, like, for example, we said that this could be used for helping defensive positioning. So if there was a way to communicate to the fielders which pitch type is coming, and they could adjust to the new per pitch type SEAM density estimation. We could also combine the results from SEAM with the fielding range of players to determine starting locations to optimize the chance of defensive success. Another thing that we were thinking about is adding success metrics based on the spray chart distributions. And so right now we're just looking at the balls in play. So was it hit or not if it was an out, or was it like what type of hit result? So we could also look into estimating outcomes other than just simply was it put into play. There's other things that we were thinking about, like accounting for the effects that the ballpark has on the spray chart distribution. So right now in our app, you can choose which ballpark kind of graphic you want to display over the visualization of the spray chart, but all of that data is actually from every just single ballpark that the batter and the pitcher have met, or the pitcher could have possibly met in. So it really is giving us kind of the most common the ballpark that the batter has played in the last couple of seasons, but there's lots of different ballpark factors that could go into this. So it'd be interesting to see if there was a way to tie in those ballpark factors into the SEAM estimation. And then finally, something that we've also considered is expanding the SEAM methodology to outcome based on where the ball was thrown in the strike zone. So instead of just a heat map over the field like we've seen so far, we're thinking about a heat map over the strike zone to see the locations that are most likely for a batter to face or a pitcher. So these are just some references that we have used in this presentation for these visualizations. We're using the Geom MLB Stadium's R package, and then the data and the visualizations are from Baseball Savant. And there's more detailed citations and references that can be found on the website. So now I'm going to switch over to do a little demonstration of the app. So this is the homepage of the app. So I'll be providing a link for this at the end of the presentation, so you can all try it out for yourselves, but I just ask that you please refrain from trying it just yet, just because we're not sure exactly how the site would react to a lot of people trying it at once. So this is what the app looks like. So the homepage here, you can select any pitcher, any batter, and then as I mentioned before, these sliders that change the ratio of the stuff to release and for the pitcher and the batter. And then you can also change which stadium. So it defaults, like I said, to the stadium where the batter has had the most at-bats in the last couple seasons. So here, the first thing you see is the full seam result, and then the different components that go into making seam, and then all of the different plots. So something that's really interesting to look at, I think, is that one of the interesting cases, so here we see just in the empirical matchup, there is a pretty good result for Verlander and Trout, but in some cases, players won't have ever faced off before. So for example, if players were on the same team for a really long time, but then trades and signings happen and now they're on opposite teams, what could happen? So one example is this upcoming season, when the Cubs play the Yankees, it's pretty likely that Anthony Rizzo could have to face off against Kyle Hendricks. So they were both on the Cubs for a while. They've never faced off initially, or they've never faced off in reality, but we can see the potential for where the batted balls may land when they meet up this season. And so this is a matchup that's never happened, but could happen and likely will in the future. But another cool thing about Seam is you can look into matchups that are just impossible, but you can still get a result from it. So one thing that will definitely never happen unless they like invent human cloning is Shohei Otani versus Shohei Otani. But we can see here that there's still a result that Seam will put out. So we can see what could happen in that scenario. So that is all I have for this demonstration, and I'll switch back to the presentation really quickly so you can see the link if you'd like to try it out for yourself. So this is a link that would take you to the website, and now I think we will go into answering some questions. So the first question here is, how were the similarity dividing variables selected? So those were just the ones that we think were most, they were the most, the main ones that you look at when you think about like what a pitch looks like and the batter's most common tendencies. I don't know if, Dave, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, only you kind of mentioned it in the talk, but right now we're just considering this as sort of general framework to work within, and those were our best guesses as to something that would give a reasonable result. But you could, any data that you have across all batters and pitchers, if you wanted to potentially use it as a variable to help calculate similarities, it could be tried. And then in addition, right now, with all of the variables that we were looking at, we were only considering means of those on, say, a per pitch type, per season basis. But you could, thinking about something like launch angle, you could maybe, instead of looking at all balls in play, split it up between ground balls and fly balls, and then look at other quantiles as well, like 10 percentile, 90th percentile, and so on and so forth. So really, you could put almost anything in here that you thought was possible. Now, figuring out what exactly works best might be more difficult because validation is, not the easiest thing here and something that we've thought a lot about, but that would be something to play with in the future. You want to go on the next one, Julia? Julia, you're muted.
Yeah, the next question, do your densities have analytical forms, or do they need to be estimated empirically through kernels? You want to take that one as well?
Yeah, so you I guess in theory you could get an analytical form, but we're estimating this with a kernel density estimator. So essentially in R, you have a grid of XY points at which you have the density, but it's not going to spit out the analytical density estimated for you. I wish it did. That would make life easier for some follow-up validation. I think the next question from Ari is somewhat similar to what we answered. Do we want to maybe really quickly, Martin's question about what does the SEAM acronym stand for? It stands for Synthetic Estimated Average Matchup. I suppose it was more of a backronym than an acronym, but yeah, that worked. How do the projected hit locations differentiate between batted ball types? Yeah, so John's question is a good one, I think. I think this is a variable that we should actually consider moving in. And I sort of mentioned that, like, because right now we don't differentiate between, say, ground ball, fly ball. That's something we could add, which I think would probably have a potential helpful outcome there. Julie, do you want to, I don't know if you're marking these as we do it. Who is in the database? All MLB players. So the underlying data is from StatCast 2017 onward. But in theory, you would have had to put a ball in play to be selectable within the app. What's Tobias' question is actually really important. So I think this was kind of maybe not super clear depending on how we went through it. So in the similarity variables, was handedness of the players included? So handedness is sort of strongly conditioned throughout the app. So you're only considering, if you're a left-handed batter, you're only measuring similarity to other left-handed batters. So basically, we're strongly conditioning on handedness everywhere. So for example, we didn't mention this in, so the empirical batter and empirical pitcher spray charts that we're comparing to, those are also conditioned on handedness to bring in some context to even the methods that we're comparing against.
Right, and for switch hitters, I think we said that a hitter and their handedness are like basically two separate players, and then we combine those back at the end if they were a switch hitter.
I think we actually recently modified that to be whatever that batter is against, whatever their most common handedness is against that pitcher. I think we ended up avoiding a switch hitter that literally switch hits against a particular pitcher. Yeah. That was our initial implementation, yeah. Sorry, Julie, do you want to pick the next one?
Yeah, sure. So how do you see SEAM being used if the shift were to be eliminated? That's actually something we were just talking about. It will be definitely interesting. I think it definitely won't have as strong of a use case for defensive positioning like I was showing, but there's still some value in like knowing the areas. So for example, which of the outfielders needs to be most prepared to go get that ball or which direction they need to be breaking in. So it's definitely gonna be interesting to see if that ends up happening. But I think no matter what, there's still a lot of like information that you could learn for defense through SEAM.
And I would say more generally too, that this estimated average matchup is being chosen right now. We're just considering this spray chart distribution for where the ball is going to land on the field as our sort of outcome metric, but we could do this for essentially any other metric where we want to inflate the sample size via similarity weighting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, restricted to just these densities we're estimating. So there's other things that we could consider.
I might be jumping ahead, but Christian asks, how difficult would it be to include quality of contact into the equation?
This is similar.
We could, but I think that affects what the use case of the app is. Because if you knew ahead of time going into an at-bat what kind of quality of contact someone was going to get, that would be kind of miraculous, I think. I mean, maybe, players have tendencies with respect to that, but that's kind of not an input that you would know going into an at-bat. So you couldn't tell fielders ahead of time, well, expect, quality contact here, so use this version of it, unless we started allowing much greater information transference to fielders.
this skipping to this question by Justin. So how do you classify trained matchups in terms of finding similar pitchers, matchups to create the synthetic hitters and pitchers? A lot of that is done under the hood and choosing these lambdas, and there's like a mathematical argument for that. And these synthetic players may not, represent the player under study very well, or they may do a great job. But there's metrics under the hood for specifying how much weight each one of these different spray charts should be given to those synthetic constructions and the empirical matchups itself. So the training, I guess, is all done sort of non-parametrically using these weighting equations, but like we have ways internally of assessing whether or not those fits are good or bad and how they should be combined. I hope that answers that question. Sorry, we're getting, Dave, do you want to comment on, Julia, do you want to comment on some of the difficulties with developing this app?
I actually don't know how to answer that, because this is kind of like my first real shiny app that I created, I guess. So I would say thanks to the RStudio team for making it so easy. Yeah, I don't know what else to say there. I'm sure there were difficulties, but I don't know how to contextualize them.
Maybe like more the visualizations. I know we had a lot of problems sometimes, like we got it to work in general, but then there was random matchups that you would put in and then it would just not work or break. So I think that was going back into the calculations and the data to figure out, we were counting something in one scenario, but then it turned out to be too small of a sample size in another scenario.
Yeah, I guess maybe another way to say that was sometimes going too quickly to making it into the app and not like debugging underlying functions. And then when there's a problem with the app, the whole debugging procedure was maybe more of a nightmare because there's a whole nother layer of abstraction on top of it. And I wasn't used to dealing with that kind of thing. Sorry,
for this,
keep repeating the same question because we haven't
break even number of matchups for empirical versus seam. Yeah, we've sort of thought about that. It's hard to really say. Again, it depends on the overall fits in each one of these synthetic components that we're sort of combining together. So, that quantity is going to be matchup specific. And I don't have all the math off the top of my head, but it is definitely favored to, as n increases, it's going to very rapidly converge to the empirical spray charts, but I don't have the exact break-even point between the synthetic components and the empirical matchup.
It's totally possible that break-even point has not been met for any individual matchup. I don't know for sure if it exists. I don't know, but I think I would be comfortable saying that for the majority of matchups that are possible, there's no way we've met that break-even point yet. Because there's so many matchups, there's like 20 historical balls in play maybe, and that's probably like a good matchup. A lot of matchups don't even have any, some have like one or two. So if you think about, how many players there are, it really gets daunting to consider how few balls, because again, this isn't plate appearances, this is balls in play currently. So it really does limit the sample size. Julia or Dan, do you want to pick another question? I'm sort of.
I think that we don't have too much time left, but maybe just the last one. Can you explain the ratio of stuff and launching Exoblast again? So that's just in those calculations for what's most important in the player similarity. We were saying that the stuff for a pitcher is like their spin and speed, and for a batter it's like their launch angle and exit velocity, and then the alternative is kind of their release point and where the batter hits it. So we are saying that it's more important for what we think for the ratio of importance is kind of the qualities of the pitch once it's in the air or it's left the bat versus the location for similarity. I think that's it. Thank you very much for everyone for listening and for your questions.
Thanks if you can still hear me.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, and thanks to your team there at Illinois for putting together that presentation.